And now I'm gonna take my Glock all in one take, load this magazine, chamber that first round, and I'm gonna shoot it like this. Okay, let's see if it chambered the next round. As you can see, it had a failure to extract. So this brass did not extract, it did not eject, and you can see the dummy round still in there. So this would be a fail. I don't think any semi-automatic pistol is praised for its reliability more than the Glock series of pistols, but as you just saw from the intro video, there is a very easy way that these guns can and will malfunction. So in this video, I'm gonna go ahead and break down my methodology to test and demonstrate these malfunctions so you can go ahead and check it out for yourself if you don't believe me. I'm also gonna go into some of the physics that causes these malfunctions, in addition to some of the things we can do to prevent them or mitigate them. And also we're gonna talk about whether or not this type of malfunction is even relevant to the subject of self-defense and firearm ownership in general. And I don't want the takeaway from this video to be that I'm bashing Glock or that I think it's a bad pistol. I don't think they're a bad pistol. I think they're a great pistol. But we need to take a step back from marketing slogans like perfection, which is automatically going to invite some degree of scrutiny, as well as all of the online shilling and the echo chambers that these things tend to create, and understand that any mechanical system can and will fail under the right conditions, under the right circumstances. Perfect reliability is something that only exists in fantasy land, in advertising, in movies, TV shows, and video games. That's why you don't have to worry about your tank's transmission breaking down when you're playing World of Tanks using the sign-up code COMBAT. If you're unfamiliar with World of Tanks, it's a free-to-play, online player versus player ground vehicle combat game that features armored vehicles like light tanks, medium tanks, self-propelled guns from the interwar period, World War II, and the early Cold War. Now, there are several games in this genre out there, and World of Tanks is probably my favorite of the bunch. I think it strikes the best balance between being an arcade game and being a simulator, in that it does simulate stuff like the velocity of the shells, the energy of the shells, top speeds, the armor layouts, and the armor values of the tanks themselves, while not being overly realistic to the point of being unfun. I've been playing the game on and off for almost 5 years now, so I was actually super happy when they contacted me to sponsor my video. And a lot of those people reaching out to YouTubers are, of course, unethical at best and downright scams at worst. So when a game like World of Tanks approaches me, it's something I'm already familiar with and something I already like, I'm gonna jump on it. Go ahead and check them out. Use the sign-up code COMBAT to receive some in-game rewards. Both new and returning players can use it. If you click the link down in the description below, it'll autofill with the code for you, so you can go ahead and sign up right away. Thank you, World of Tanks, for sponsoring this video. So the way I tested these pistols is I essentially held the gun almost like a teacup, and I also held it out perpendicular to my body. The reason why I did that is because normally when you shoot a handgun, the recoil from the frame actually goes into your arm through the backstrap of the pistol, and of course this absorbs all the recoil. But when the gun is completely perpendicular, it basically goes into your thumb, and then the recoil just wants to push the gun all the way back. So more energy is being put into the pistol, less energy is being put into my arm and into my body. This is the most extreme example of a limp wrist phenomenon. Now, of course, a more typical limp wrist will occur with someone that's maybe unfamiliar with firearms or has very weak grip strength. They'll not be holding the pistol tight enough or maybe not high enough, and the gun will recoil more in their hand than someone that's actually holding the gun nice and tight up high on the frame. And this will induce malfunctions typically with a pistol like a Glock. Now, I also want to talk about safety for a second. The way that you do this safely is you start with a dummy round. So this is a totally inert fake round. It's just made out of a solid piece of aluminum, essentially. The next round is actually my live round I put on top of that. And so what we're testing for is that this round in the chamber will go off, the case will extract and eject out of the gun, and then the pistol should be able to feed this dummy round into the chamber. Oh, shit. So yeah, for safety purposes, this second round in the magazine doesn't actually need to be a live round, because once it's fed into the chamber and it's ready to go, the gun's recocked, the gun has passed the test. And so what that means is if the gun does pass the test and feeds the next round in the magazine, it's not a live round, and that you're not potentially flagging yourself or anyone around you with a loaded and chambered live round. And that's why for all the tests, I put the dummy round in first and then the live round on top of that. We shoot the live round and it may or may not feed the dummy round. Now the ammo I used for the test is actually this stuff here. This is Swiss P 124 grain black round FMJ something or the other. This ammo actually has the T head stamp, which stands for the Thun ammo plant in Switzerland. It's the same ammo plant that makes the Swiss military ammunition. Now throughout the test I did refer to it as 9mm NATO, and I thought it was, but after chronographing it, it's more around 1200 to 1250 FPS, whereas 9mm NATO is usually above 1250 FPS. But in any case, it's extremely high quality ammo. It's fairly consistent. It's the ammo that I've been shooting all year long for competition, and I've probably shot about 4,500 rounds of it this year, and I'm down to my last 2 boxes. So the first gun that I tested was a Glock 19M. This gun is brand new. It's one of their newer models. It's made in the United States, and it's of course the classic compact Glock chambered in 9mm. And this gun is practically brand new. In fact, it is brand new. Those were the very first shots fired out of this gun at all. As you can see, there's brass in there. It failed to extract again. Another round. And again, we have another failure to extract. Didn't feed the next round. Failed to extract. Last round. Didn't feed the next round. Failed to extract. You can actually see all the copper anti-seize that's put on from the factory still in this gun. So those were actually the very first shots out of this gun. And of course, all of them were failures. I completely expected that. And of course, the magazines were OEM Glock brand Glock magazines from Austria. Now, of course, I make sure to list all those aspects, that this is a compact Glock made in the USA, completely brand new. So the next gun I tested is a Glock 17. The reason why I specifically wanted to test this one is because it's the complete opposite end of the spectrum. It is not a compact, it's a full-size Glock 17. It is not a brand new gun. It's pretty well worn. It's a police trade-in pistol, actually. It is not made in the USA. It is actually made in Austria. So I'm trying to cover as many bases as possible so that the copers don't come out and, you know, post in the cope section about how, well, your gun wasn't Austrian, that's why it failed. Obviously, it didn't feed the next round. It did not extract or eject that cartridge. Did not feed. And it failed to extract. Did not feed the next round. And oh, that time it did actually extract and eject that round. Look at that. Oh, that time we had a failure to eject. So what that means is it pulled the shell out of the chamber and it didn't have enough energy to completely kick the case out of the ejection port. Did not feed the next round. And it failed to extract. With the Glock 17, I did the exact same test. Again, same safety measures in place, same methodology, and the gun failed every single time, as expected. So now we have 2 Glocks, one brand new, one well used, one American, one Austrian, one compact, one full size. Both of them failed 100% of the time, the exact same way, and I could have sat there and burned up a whole box of ammo, and I'm pretty sure they would have failed every single time. So before I move forward and talk about some of the other guns I tested, I kind of want to contextualize it and talk about the physics of what actually is occurring here. And it has to do with how recoil-operated pistols work. So the vast majority of semi-automatic handguns out there, especially in centerfire cartridges like 9mm Luger and up, are recoil-operated pistols. Of course, Newton's third law says that every action has an equal and opposite reaction. So when a projectile is propelled out of a barrel, not only is that energy being used to push the round forward, there's an equal amount of energy being sent back into the gun, and typically that's being pushed onto the slide. Then any of that excess recoil energy that didn't go into working the slide goes into the frame. Now also some of that energy is stored in the recoil spring. Once all of that energy of the slide moving rearward is dissipated and the energy stored in the recoil spring starts to overcome it, the slide will start to move forward. It'll begin to feed the next round from the magazine. It'll chamber it, then the whole slide will lock up with the barrel and the gun is ready to fire again. So normally when we shoot a handgun, we're holding the grip, and this creates essentially a semi-rigid structure that holds the frame in place in space so that the slide, when the gun fires, can actually compress that recoil spring against this semi-rigid structure here and allows the slide to extract and eject that last case and then feed and chamber the next round. If we take this support away and say this gun was just floating out in space and there was nothing to brace this frame, we're relying entirely on the mass of the frame and thus its inertia to allow the slide to move independently of the frame and compress that recoil spring. Therein lies the problem. Of course, Newton's first law, an object at rest will tend to stay at rest unless acted upon by an outside force. But because the mass of the Glock frame or any of the polymer pistols out there, because the mass is so low on the frame, it has very little inertia. Now, because these pistols are so popular, and not only these pistols, but any pistol like it, a lot of people are under the impression that this sort of thing will happen to any recoil-operated pistol, and that is simply not the case. The next pistol I tested was a Beretta M9, and the reason why I tested this pistol is because it has a metal frame. It has an aluminum frame, and it has much more mass in the frame. And of course, if it has more mass, that means it has greater inertia, which means that this frame has a greater tendency to, on its own, want to stay at rest. So first round, failure to feed. Again, another failure to feed. See that dummy round sticking up there on the feed ramp. Another failure to feed. That time we had a failure to extract. And another classic failure to feed. Instead of failures to extract, like on the Glock, I started getting failures to feed. So this would actually be a good opportunity to talk about the cycle of operations of how a semi-automatic handgun works, because there are actually degrees of failure that you can measure here in this test, and not all failures are created equal. Some are actually worse failures than others, and not from a standpoint of they're harder to clear or anything like that. This is more from a standpoint of energy retention and how far along it got in the cycle of operations before it failed. So the cycle of operations of a lock breech semi-automatic handgun like a Beretta 92 or a Glock 19 or a Glock 17, starting from the point of ignition, that is firing the gun, the slide begins to move rearward and starts to unlock. That is, the barrel and slide are locked together and they begin to unlock under recoil. Once the gun is fully unlocked, the spent casing begins to get extracted from the chamber. Once it clears the chamber, it hits the ejector and gets ejected from the pistol. Once the slide has traveled all the way to the rear, the rearward motion of the slide is overcome by the potential energy stored in the recoil spring. The slide then begins to move forward. It starts by feeding the next round out of the magazine onto the feed ramp. Then it begins to push the round into the chamber. Once the round is fully chambered, the gun continues forward until it goes into the fully locked position. And somewhere in the process, it also recocks the hammer or the striker, whatever firing mechanism of the pistol. So with that said, the worst malfunction you could have in a test like this would be a classic failure to extract. That means the slide did not have enough movement rearward relative to the frame to even get the spent casing out of the chamber. The next worst failure would be a failure to eject. This means that the case got pulled out of the chamber, but it didn't have enough energy to fully kick that round out of the way of the ejection port before the slide came forward again. The next malfunction would be a failure to feed. That means that the slide got far enough back, fast enough to extract and eject that last round, but it didn't have enough energy to push the next round into the chamber, or it means that the slide did not stay all the way to the rear long enough to allow the magazine to lift that next round up so that the slide could actually chamber the next round. So basically, a failure to feed is a better result than a failure to eject. A failure to eject is a better result than a failure to extract. The Beretta 92 is an example of a handgun that just barely fails this test under these conditions. The next gun I tested is an example of a gun that ran reliably under these conditions. Had a failure to feed. Failure to eject. Oh, that time it did actually cycle. And let's go ahead and see. Our dummy round is in there. We can see our orange dummy round in there. I hate the trigger on this thing, man. And there's our dummy round. Ow. Looks like it fed that round. And if we pop open the slide, there's our dummy round. And if we pop open the slide, you can see our dummy round in there. The first two shots I had were failures. I don't remember if they were failures to feed or failures to eject or something like that. But after that point, maybe the gun had warmed up or something like that. The next 5 shots ran flawlessly. And I will say that after I went and checked the gun after testing it, I noticed this gun was like bone dry. And this gun is pretty much in brand new condition. I've put maybe 100 rounds through it since I bought it a couple years ago. I just don't really like CZs, or at least I don't like them as much as I thought I would like them. Regardless, in this particular test, the gun did run very well. And also in my YouTube short, very similar to this, I shot this gun 6 times and had no failures in those 6 shots. The only thing that happened was that the gun did not lock back on an empty magazine. This gun has a few things going for it, I think, that put it at an advantage over a Beretta 92 and a Glock. Of course, it does have that metal frame. It is more massive than the plastic frames of the Glock. But you'll also notice that the CZ75, due to its design with the internal rails and just how tiny this slide is less massive than a Beretta slide. So that means that given the same amount of energy, this slide is going to be able to accelerate faster, which of course in this scenario is an advantage because all of this relies on the slide's ability to accelerate independently of the frame. Now, I didn't take my Browning high power out or my SIG P210 out for this video, but in my YouTube short, both the high power and the SIG P210 ran flawlessly, 6 for 6 shots with the worse, lower energy 115 grain ammo that I was using there. And this is a perfect opportunity to talk about how this is not something that occurs with every semi-automatic handgun out there. The proliferation of Glock pistols and Glock clones out there on the market has led people to believe, and also due in part to a lot of junk information out there that's repeated on the internet, that all semi-automatic handguns will experience malfunctions if you limp wrist them. And in this example, that is simply not the case. In the example of my SIG P210, that is simply not the case. And in the example of the FN high power, that is simply not the case. And that has been my experience across the board with these pistols doing these sorts of limp wrist tests. And any other people that have done similar tests can attest to mostly the same findings as what I found out here, just because of how the physics works. This is nothing more than a physics equation. These guns have less mass in the frame than these guns right here, and the slides weigh about the same, so that the energy imparted on these two pistols means that the slide on this gun will accelerate more rapidly relative to the frame than it will on this pistol. That's all it is. I'm not bashing the Glock and praising the CZ75. I like the Glock better than I like a CZ75. I would just like to challenge these people that act like the Glock is, you know, totally perfect in every single way. So by now, hopefully most of you watching have a pretty good idea of what exactly causes limp wrist malfunctions. And so let's talk about what are some of the things we can do to improve the reliability of semi-automatic handguns under a limp wrist condition. One of the things we can do is we can reduce the weight of the slide. That's not always realistic, and that usually involves making lightning cuts and stuff like that, and it's really not feasible in most cases. You could also increase the power of your round or increase the energy of your round. So if your gun is failing with 115 grain ammo that goes 1150 FPS, step it up to a plus P load and you might see more reliability. Instead of failures to eject under a limp wrist scenario, you might get failures to feed, or you might have a gun that cycles. So increasing the energy of the round, and again, all of the energy going out the front end also comes right back at the shooter, you can tend to increase the reliability of a semi-automatic lock breech centerfire handgun. One of the things you can do is also put in a lighter weight recoil spring. If you put a lighter weight recoil spring, it's easier for that energy to compress that recoil spring against the frame. That allows the slide to move relative to the frame faster and easier than it would with a very stiff recoil spring. And all the guns in this test were using stock recoil springs. Now, the trade-off with a lighter weight recoil spring is that you're going to experience more felt recoil. So energy-wise, physics-wise, the total amount of recoil in the system is going to be exactly the same, but the felt recoil is going to be higher. So what that means is with less resistance of that spring, less energy is being used to compress that spring. So that means more of that recoil energy is being transferred into the frame, and thus more recoil energy is being transferred into your hand. So it'll feel snappier typically with a lighter weight recoil spring. Consequently, because it is a lighter weight recoil spring, there's also going to be less energy stored in it. So that means on the return, when the slide goes forward, it's not going to move forward as quickly, and you could end up having issues with like failures to feed if you have really stiff magazine lips or feed lips or a very steep feed ramp angle. Changing the recoil spring to a lighter weight recoil spring is not always a recipe for more reliability. You can run into more issues related to the forward motion of the slide as well. Really, the best way to improve the reliability of a semi-automatic recoil-operated lock breech firearm is to increase the mass of the frame. And of course, that comes with the inherent drawback that the pistol is going to weigh more. It's not going to be as comfortable to carry. And that's why one of the things that is one of the main selling points of a pistol like a Glock is also kind of its own worst enemy in a test like this, because these guns are much lighter than the equivalent steel or aluminum frame handguns in a similar size. Now, don't take that the wrong way and think that's me suggesting that you need to stop carrying a plastic pistol and that you need to swap it out for a metal frame pistol like a CZ or a Beretta or a 1911 or something like that. I'm not saying that at all. That's because one of the easiest ways to add mass to the frame of a handgun is actually to just load your magazine. So up until this point, I'd be doing all my tests with 1 round in the magazine. A fully loaded magazine can add almost, a pound to the frame of a handgun. And with only 1 round in the magazine, this thing is actually pretty light. And not only that, by having more rounds in the magazine, you are compressing the spring in the magazine further, which increases the amount of force pushing that next round up, which increases the reliability in those first few crucial rounds in the magazine. Of course, only if the slide makes it back far enough to even be in a position to feed the next round. So going back to the Beretta 92 as an example of a pistol that just barely failed the test, it had failures to feed. And what I suspect was happening was the slide was coming all the way to the rear, but it wasn't staying to the rear long enough to allow that magazine enough time to push the next round up, and so that the slide could pick it up, because all of the rounds were feeding in at a sort of a weird angle, like the slide was catching it mid-case. So what exactly happened when I loaded the magazines fully on the Beretta 92? Let's check it out. So right now I've got 15 rounds in the magazine. I still have my dummy round on top, followed by my NATO round, so that when this gun, or if this gun feeds the next round, I'm not going to be potentially flagging myself. And as you can see, it fed that first round no problem. And if I open up the slide, we should be able to see that orange dummy round in there. There it is. So let's go ahead and do this a few more times. Full magazine, dummy round underneath the top round. I don't know why I do that. So normally when I shoot bullseye, I load the gun, I take the gun in my other hand, and then I load my firing hand, and I put my other hand in my pocket like that. But I'm trying to not grip the gun tightly here, so. Looks like it fed the top round. And if we pull back the slide, ta-da, there's our orange dummy round. Looks like it fed the top round. And there's our dummy round, popped right out. So here we have an example of a gun that goes from just barely failing to feed to feeding fine as soon as you put more rounds in the magazine. And then of course, to be fair to the Glock, I did the exact same thing with the Glock magazine. So now I've got a full magazine, again with that dummy round underneath the live round. Let's go ahead and see if this improves the reliability of the Glock 17. It did not feed the next round, however, oh, it actually failed to extract again. Failure to eject. It extracted all the way out of the chamber and then got hooked on the breech of the barrel, I should say. Of course, it did not feed the next round, which is that dummy round. It did not feed the dummy round. We have a failure to extract. Okay, again, we have that same sort of failure to eject it did actually improve the result with the Glock 17. So instead of having just straight up failures to extract, that means the slide didn't even have enough energy relative to the frame to get that spent casing out of the chamber, I actually ended up having failures to eject. So that means the slide was clearing the chamber, it just didn't have enough energy to hit that extractor with enough force to kick the spent round out. So then, combining the knowledge that we have now, you could take a Glock 17 and maybe with the right combination of ammo, the right combination of recoil spring, and also a fully loaded magazine, you could have a more reliable Glock pistol. And I think, this is more speculation, I think guns come from the factory with recoil springs that tend to be on the heavier side. And I believe that's from a standpoint of they know that 99% of people out there are probably never going to replace the recoil spring on their pistol. So that as it wears out, as it wears down, it doesn't become so weak as to become potentially damaging to the frame of the pistol. Because again, that is the trade-off that comes with a lighter weight recoil spring. It does begin to beat up the pistol more, and it transfers more of that energy into your hand with a quicker pressure curve. The ways that we can improve the reliability of a pistol when it comes to a limp wrist scenario is to lighten the slide, increase the energy of the round, decrease the strength of the recoil spring, and increase the mass of the frame. And also, to a lesser degree, the weight of your hammer spring or your striker assembly can also affect this too, because some of the energy of the slide does actually go into recocking the firearm every time, but I think this is going to be more negligible than any of those other things I just talked about. Do with that information what you will. I recommend you go ahead and test this for yourself with your carry gun, with your carry ammo, and of course be safe. Use that dummy round. You don't want to potentially flag yourself. And I say put it through all kinds of worst case scenarios like I did, where the gun's totally perpendicular to my arm and flying like this, to maybe more traditional limp wrists, like holding it low or wrong or something like that, and just see how it performs. That's the most important thing, is doing your own tests, familiarizing yourself with your own gear. So now I think this would be a great time to talk about whether even limp wristing, as it's colloquially known, is even relevant to the subject of concealed carry and self-defense or firearm ownership in general. And in my opinion, I think it is. And you can disagree with me on this, that's totally valid. Because sometimes when I talk about limp wristing and how not all firearms will do it, or how that it is actually an issue of reliability that should be known and should be addressed, many people will say, well, just grip it correctly, bro. Like, as if we can account for every single variable that can happen in a real life self-defense scenario. And if you've ever watched actual gunfights, especially like police body cam footage, and many police departments, most police departments at this point probably issue some kind of polymer framed pistol, maybe striker fired, maybe hammer fired, but polymer framed. And in a not insignificant number of officer involved shootings that you can watch on body cam, you can see people draw their pistols in awkward ways in the heat of the moment, or with not ideal grips, and in a not insignificant number of body cam officer involved shootings, you can see pistols like the Glock, like the Smith & Wesson M&Ps, like the SIG 320s have malfunctions related to an improper grip. So I think that is absolutely relevant to the subject. And it should be something that you consider and something you should know about, and not something that we pretend doesn't exist and doesn't matter, because not every self-defense scenario is going to be like this perfect setup like we imagine it in our head, like John Wick. You know, we're going to start in the surrender position, and then we're going to draw with a perfect grip, and we're going to fire 2 rounds, you know, one of the head to the chest, and it's going to be super cool. Like, no, you're going to fall flat on your ass. You're going to be involved in some kind of a fist fight maybe, and that gun's going to come out of the holster the way that it's going to come out, and you're going to be ripping it out pretty much as fast as possible, and you're going to be working the trigger as fast as possible, and you may not have the time and the presence of mind to properly grip your pistol. And so I think it's something that absolutely should be considered, known about, and something that you should test for. All right, you guys, well, that's it for limp wrist testing. I hope you enjoyed this video. This was a much more technical video than I'm used to making. Hopefully I didn't lose your interest in here, and hopefully you've walked away with a little bit more knowledge about how these things work, and maybe you know, some desire to test your equipment, get out, hit the range, and familiarize yourself with the equipment that you rely on, sometimes maybe potentially to save your life. So if you enjoyed this video, go ahead and check out some of my other videos. I would also really appreciate it if you supported this channel directly via a channel membership. If you click the join button next to the subscribe button, you can become a channel member. And you also get some custom emojis and a little symbol next to your name in the comments, which I think is pretty cool. Thank you all for watching. Have a great day, and I will see you in the next one. I've got a lot of cool videos lined up here in the next few weeks. And don't forget to check out World of Tanks. Link is in the description below. Oh shit.